The fiery crash. Jack Carter sat alone in the cockpit of his worn-out cargo ship, the Rust Bucket, humming a slow tune. He had been drifting through deep space for days, delivering supplies to forgotten colonies and lost stations. This part of the galaxy was empty, just darkness, dust, and dead rocks floating through the void. Jack yawned and stretched his arms. Nothing ever happened out here. Then the alarm blared. Jack jolted up, knocking over his half-empty coffee. "What the hell?" he muttered, wiping the stain off his old jacket. His ship's scanners had picked up something big. He squinted at the screen. A massive fireball was streaking across space, heading straight for a barren moon below. It wasn't an asteroid. It was a ship. Jack watched as it spiraled out of control, flames bursting from its engines. The ship was breaking apart, pieces exploding as it tore through the thin atmosphere of the rocky moon. Then, boom! A huge shockwave rattled his ship as the wreckage crashed into the moon's surface, sending a fiery cloud into the air. Jack gripped the controls, steadying himself. For a long moment, he just sat there, staring at the screen. He should turn around. He should keep flying. Crashes in deep space usually meant trouble. But then, his ship's scanner beeped again. Jack frowned. A life signal. He leaned forward, checking the data. There was someone alive down there, weak, but alive. Jack sighed, rubbing his temples. This is a bad idea. He wasn't a hero. He was just a guy trying to make a living, staying out of trouble. But then he imagined himself drifting through space, helpless, waiting for someone, anyone, to help. He gritted his teeth. "All right," he muttered, "just a quick look." Landing on the moon, Jack guided the Rust Bucket down through the thin, dusty atmosphere. The moon was nothing but rocks and craters, barely any air, barely any life. But the wreckage was easy to find. A smoking crater, glowing red with fire. His ship's landing gear groaned as it touched the surface. Jack grabbed his breather mask and checked his blaster, just in case. Then he stepped out into the cold, silent wasteland. The wreckage was worse than he thought. The ship, or what was left of it, was torn apart, metal scattered everywhere. Flames flickered in the low gravity, casting eerie shadows across the rocks. Jack's boots crunched against the ground as he moved toward the source of the life signal. His scanner led him to a half-buried escape pod, its hull dented and scorched. The emergency hatch was still sealed. Jack pressed his hand against the pod. It was hot, too hot to touch for long. Whoever was inside didn't have much time. He pulled out his laser cutter and got to work. Sparks flew as he sliced through the locks. The metal groaned, and with one last pull, the hatch popped open. Inside, a small figure lay motionless. Jack's breath caught in his throat. The survivor was not human. The mysterious alien girl. She had silver-blue skin that shimmered under the firelight. Her dark hair was tangled, and two small horns curved back from her forehead. Her face was delicate, almost otherworldly beautiful, but she was pale, too pale. Jack quickly checked for injuries. Her suit was torn, and her breathing was weak. She was barely hanging on. "Hey," Jack said, shaking her gently. "Can you hear me?" No response. Jack cursed under his breath. He wasn't a medic, but he knew one thing. If he left her here, she would die. He carefully lifted her out of the pod. She was lighter than expected, her body fragile. As he carried her back toward his ship, his heart pounded. Who was she? What kind of ship was she on? And more importantly, who shot her down? Danger approaching. Just as he reached his ship, his scanner blared again. Jack froze. A new signal had appeared. Multiple ships, incoming fast. He glanced back at the wreckage. Had someone been chasing her? Jack rushed inside his ship, sealing the airlock behind him. He placed the girl on a small cot and ran back to the cockpit. His hands moved fast over the controls, flipping switches. On his radar, he saw them. 3 enemy ships closing in. His instincts screamed at him. This wasn't a random crash. This girl, whoever she was being hunted. Jack tightened his grip on the controls. "I don't know who you are," he muttered, glancing at the unconscious alien girl, "but I sure hope you're worth the trouble." He hit the engines, and the rust bucket roared to life, lifting off just as the enemy ships descended toward the moon. As Jack shot into space, one thing was clear. He had just stepped into something way bigger than he ever wanted. And there was no turning back now. Escape and secrets. Jack's ship, the rust bucket, blasted through the thin atmosphere of the barren moon, shaking violently as it left the gravity well. Warning alarms screeched in the cockpit, flashing red. His ship wasn't built for fast getaways, and the 3 enemy vessels were gaining on him fast. Jack gritted his teeth, fingers flying over the controls. If he didn't think fast, he'd be space dust. "Come on, old girl," he muttered, slamming the throttle forward. The rust bucket groaned as it pushed to maximum speed, the engine straining under the sudden boost. Behind him, the 3 enemy ships adjusted course. They weren't just following him. They were hunting him. Jack checked the weapons system. 2 forward blasters, not enough against 3 sleek, well-armed fighters. His best bet was running, not fighting. His radar beeped. Incoming fire. Jack jerked the controls, rolling the rust bucket just in time to dodge a bright blue plasma bolt. The shot screamed past, barely missing the hull. The second shot didn't miss. Boom! The ship lurched violently, and Jack's head slammed against the control panel. Sparks rained down from the overhead circuits. His shields were already down to 40%. In the back of the ship, the unconscious alien girl, Ariva, let out a soft whimper but didn't wake. Jack's mind raced. He had one shot at getting out alive. His eyes flicked to the navigation map. The nearest escape route was a dense asteroid field not far from here. If he could reach it, he could lose them in the debris. But could the rust bucket survive it? He had no choice. Gripping the controls, Jack dived straight into the asteroid field. The chase through the asteroids. The enemy ships followed, weaving through the floating mountains of rock and ice. The entire ship shuddered as Jack maneuvered between giant tumbling boulders, dodging left and right, heart pounding. Another plasma blast grazed the hull, sending another warning flash across his screen. Hold together, Jack growled, narrowly avoiding a spinning asteroid the size of a city bus. The enemy pilots were skilled. They weren't giving up. Jack spotted an opportunity, a narrow tunnel between 2 massive asteroids, barely wide enough for his ship. A crazy idea formed in his mind. He reached under the console and flipped the emergency power limiter, diverting every bit of energy to the thrusters. The ship jerked forward at breakneck speed. Come on. At the last second, Jack cut the engines completely and used the ship's momentum to glide silently through the tunnel. The enemy ships weren't so lucky. The first fighter clipped the asteroid wall, spinning out of control before slamming into the rocks in a blazing explosion. The second barely avoided the crash, but had to swerve, losing Jack's trail. The third, now alone, hesitated just a little too long. Jack reactivated the engines and punched the thrusters, rocketing out the other side. By the time the enemy ship found its way through, the rust bucket had already jumped to light speed. Jack exhaled, running a shaky hand through his sweat-drenched hair. That was too damn close. The girl wakes up. With the immediate danger gone, Jack turned his attention to his mysterious passenger. He walked to the small med-bay, where the alien girl lay on a cot, breathing shallowly. Her silver-blue skin shimmered faintly under the dim ship lights, and her dark hair was still tangled. She was young, maybe early 20s by human standards, but clearly not just any alien. Jack crouched beside her. "All right, mystery girl. Time to wake up and tell me what the hell is going on." He tapped a button on the med scanner. Her vitals were stabilizing. Then suddenly, her eyes snapped open. Jack took a step back, startled. Her eyes glowed softly, a deep violet color that seemed to swirl like a galaxy. She gasped, panic filling her face. Hey, take it easy, Jack said, raising his hands. You're safe. You were in a crash. I pulled you out. She stared at him, her breathing rapid. Her lips moved, but the words were unintelligible, a flowing language Jack had never heard before. Jack sighed. Figures. You don't speak standard. She blinked, then glanced down at the translator device clipped to her suit. With a trembling hand, she tapped it. The small device hummed to life. Her voice came through, soft and melodic, though strained. Where am I? Jack folded his arms. My ship. You almost died back there. Her eyes flickered with fear as she remembered. The attack. They found me. Jack narrowed his eyes. She hesitated. Then, her voice barely above a whisper. The Darvins. Jack's stomach dropped. The Darvins were no ordinary mercenaries. They were a ruthless empire of conquerors, known for hunting down survivors and leaving no witnesses. If they were after this girl, that meant she was important. Jack exhaled sharply. All right, lady. I think it's time you tell me exactly who you are, and why the Darvins want you dead. She swallowed hard, looking away. Then, after a long silence, my name is Ariva, she said, and I was a princess of Velari. Jack blinked. He had just rescued royalty. And now, the most dangerous hunters in the galaxy were on his tail. Jack groaned, rubbing his temples. Just once, I'd like to pick up a normal hitchhiker. Ariva's violet eyes met his. You saved my life, Captain Carter. Jack sighed. Yeah, and I'm starting to think that was a really bad idea. The chase. The moment Ariva uttered the words, I am a princess of Velari, Jack knew he was in deep trouble. Royalty. That explained everything. Jack leaned against the cockpit door, rubbing his forehead. Let me guess. You were supposed to be safe somewhere, but things went sideways. Ariva nodded weakly. They attacked our escape convoy. I barely got away, but they will not stop until they have me. Jack exhaled. Of course, this wasn't just some unlucky alien girl running from pirates. She was the last survivor of a royal bloodline, being hunted by a ruthless empire. And now he was stuck in the middle of it. Great, Jack muttered. Just great. He walked back to the cockpit, checking the ship's radar. The Darvin hunters had been left behind in the asteroid field, but Jack wasn't stupid enough to think they'd given up. No, they would come back, and in greater numbers. Jack's fingers hovered over the navigation controls. He had to think fast. Nowhere to hide. What's the plan, Captain? Ariva's voice was soft, but Jack could hear the fear behind it. Plan, Jack snorted. Lady, I didn't sign up for this. My plan was to haul some cargo, maybe stop at a nice station, drink some bad whiskey, and sleep in my own damn bed. Ariva's expression darkened. I understand. If you let me off at the next port, I will find my own way. Jack stared at her, then laughed. Oh, that's cute. You really think you'll survive out there alone? Her hands clenched into fists. I do not need your help. Jack rolled his eyes. Why were royals always like this? Listen, princess, I don't know what your people do, but out here, the Darvins have eyes everywhere. You step off my ship, they'll sniff you out before you take your first breath of station air. And trust me, they won't be polite. Ariva looked away, silent. Jack sighed, tapping the screen. All right, I know a guy. His name's Taro Rix, runs a black market station near the edge of Velari space. If anyone can get you somewhere safe, it's him. Ariva's eyes widened. Taro Rix, the smuggler. Jack raised an eyebrow. You know him. She nodded. He used to work for my family. He was reliable, but also dangerous. Jack smirked. Sounds like my kind of guy. He punched in the coordinates. The ship's engines rumbled, setting course for Shadow's Rest, one of the most lawless smuggler stations in the sector. But just as the ship jumped into hyperspace, Jack's radar blared a new warning. He frowned. That's not right. We just... Then it hit him. They had been tracked. The ambush. The moment the rust bucket dropped out of hyperspace, Jack knew he had walked into a trap. Directly ahead, 2 Darwin warships floated in space, blocking their path. Their sleek black hulls absorbed the starlight, looking like floating nightmares. Jack gripped the controls, his stomach twisting. Clever bastards, he muttered. The Darwins had predicted his escape route. They knew he'd try to find help, and they had cut him off before he even got close. Ariva stiffened beside him. We cannot fight them, Captain. No kidding. Jack's screen lit up. An incoming transmission. The deep, cold voice echoed through the cockpit. Unidentified vessel, power down your engines and surrender the girl. Do so, and we may let you live. Jack's pulse quickened. He recognized that voice. Commander Voss, a Darwin officer known for his brutality and efficiency. If Voss was here, that meant this wasn't just a hunt. This was a full-scale capture mission. Jack tapped the mute button and turned to Ariva. So what's it gonna be, Princess? You want to turn yourself in and hope they give you a nice cell. Her violet eyes burned with defiance. I will never surrender. Jack grinned. Good answer. He slammed the thrusters forward. Dodging death. The rust bucket roared to life, shooting toward the enemy blockade at full speed. Immediately, the Darwin ships opened fire. Bright red energy beams streaked across space, barely missing Jack's ship as he swerved hard, dodging between the incoming blasts. The cockpit shook violently, alarms blaring. Shields at 20%, Ariva shouted, gripping the seat. Jack growled. Hold on. He pulled the ship into a sharp roll, diving toward the planet below, an abandoned desert world with deep canyons and stormy skies. The Darwin ships followed. Jack gritted his teeth. If he stayed in open space, he was dead. His only hope was hiding in the planet's atmosphere. He angled the ship downward, pushing the engines to their limit. The hull groaned under the pressure, heat building as they entered the planet's atmosphere. Behind them, the Darwins kept firing, their lasers tearing through the clouds. Jack's hands flew over the controls, guiding the ship into a massive canyon system. The sharp cliffs and jagged rocks passed by in a blur as Jack zigzagged through the narrow tunnels, using the landscape as cover. The Darwins followed, but they weren't as nimble. One of the enemy ships clipped a canyon wall, exploding in a brilliant fireball. Ha, that's one down, Jack grinned. But the second Darwin ship was still on their tail. Jack's eyes flicked to the scanners. He saw a deep cavern ahead, a narrow opening just big enough for his ship. Ariva's eyes widened. We will never fit in there. Jack grinned. Wanna bet? He yanked the controls, sending the ship into a tight spiral, narrowly squeezing through the cavern entrance. The Darwin pilot, too large and too slow, didn't make it. With a deafening boom, the enemy ship crashed into the rocks, sending a shockwave through the canyon. Jack let out a deep breath. That was fun. Ariva stared at him in disbelief. You are insane. Jack smirked. You're welcome. For now, they were safe. But Jack knew this wasn't over. The Darwins would keep coming, and next time, they'd bring even bigger guns. Jack turned to Ariva. Looks like we're in this together, Princess. Time to find your smuggler friend before they find us first. Ariva nodded. Then let's not waste time. Jack hit the thrusters again, vanishing into the stormy horizon. Betrayal in the shadows. Jack Carter wasn't the type to trust people easily. Smugglers, bounty hunters, ex-soldiers. He had dealt with all kinds of scum in the galaxy. And every time, there was one rule. Never trust anyone who smiles too much. As the rust bucket approached Shadow's Rest, Jack kept that rule in mind. The station wasn't on any official map. It drifted deep in an asteroid belt, hidden from patrols and tracking beacons. From the outside, it looked like a massive rusting jump pile, metal plates haphazardly welded together, lights flickering dimly. But inside, it was a thriving black market, filled with the worst the galaxy had to offer. Pirates, smugglers, arms dealers, and fugitives all called this place home. Ariva sat beside him, watching the station come into view. She looked uneasy. "You sure your friend can be trusted?" Jack asked. She hesitated. "Taro Rix is complicated." Jack smirked. "That's a fancy way of saying no." Ariva sighed. "He helped my family once. He may help me now." Jack didn't like Maves, but he didn't have a better plan. The Darvins were still out there, hunting them, and they needed a safe place to regroup. With a final push of the thrusters, the rust bucket glided into the docking bay, its landing gear clunking against the station floor. Jack stood up, checked his blaster, and glanced at Ariva. "Stay close, Princess. Places like this eat people alive. Welcome to Shadow's Rest." The docking bay was dimly lit, steam hissing from vents, flickering neon signs advertising weapons, cybermods, and no questions asked. Everywhere, rough-looking aliens and humans walked the metal corridors, speaking in hushed voices. Some eyed Jack's ship, others glanced at Ariva with interest. Jack kept a hand near his blaster. This place smelled like a setup. As they walked, a large reptilian alien stepped in front of them, blocking their path. Its yellow eyes gleamed. "New faces," it rasped. "Fresh meat." Jack didn't break stride. He kept walking, right past the brute. The alien grabbed Jack's shoulder. Jack sighed. He hated this part. In a blur of movement, Jack twisted the alien's arm and slammed his fist into its snout. The creature staggered back, snarling, but Jack pulled his blaster and leveled it at its head. "We clear?" Jack asked calmly. The alien hissed, but backed off. Ariva stared at Jack. "You are very direct." Jack holstered his blaster. "It saves time." They reached a small bar near the back of the station, its neon sign barely flickering. Inside, the air smelled of cheap liquor and burnt circuitry. Jack spotted Taro Rix immediately. He was a tall, wiry man with dark skin, cybernetic implants on his temples, and a grin that showed off a gold tooth. He lounged in a booth, surrounded by mercenaries and a holographic gambling game. "Well, well," Taro said, raising a glass. "If it isn't Jack Carter. Thought you were dead." Jack slid into the seat across from him. Not for lack of trying. Taro's gaze flicked to Ariva. His smile faded. "That's an expensive passenger you've got there, friend." Ariva lifted her chin. "I need passage to the Valeri outposts. I assume you can arrange that." Taro leaned back, tapping his fingers against the table. He studied her carefully, then let out a slow whistle. "You're in more trouble than I thought." Jack crossed his arms. "That a problem?" Taro chuckled. "Not for me, but for you." He leaned forward. "The Darvins are already here." "The double cross." Jack tensed. Ariva stiffened. "What do you mean?" Taro sighed. "Word travels fast. There's a bounty on your head, Princess, and a fat one." Jack cursed under his breath. That meant half the station was probably looking for them. Taro leaned in. "Now I like you, Jack. I really do. But business is business." Jack's gut tightened. "Don't do this, Taro." Taro snapped his fingers. Immediately, 6 mercenaries stood up from the shadows, weapons drawn. Jack's blaster was out before they could react. He blasted the first merc in the leg and grabbed the table, flipping it over for cover. Chaos erupted. Ariva ducked as lasers scorched the air. Jack rolled behind the bar, grabbing a bottle and hurling it at one of the mercs' heads. Taro vanished in the commotion. Jack swore. Figures. Ariva grabbed a fallen blaster. She wasn't an expert shooter, but she fired a shot that hit a pipe overhead, releasing a cloud of steam. Jack used the distraction, popping up and firing 2 more shots. Another Merc dropped. The bar was in complete chaos. Drunken aliens ran for cover. Flashing lights and sirens blared. "We need to move," Arriva shouted. Jack spotted an emergency exit in the back. "Go." They sprinted through the doorway, running down a rusted metal corridor. Behind them, alarms blared. Station security would be after them now, too. The final betrayal. Jack led them through a hidden maintenance tunnel, hoping to reach his ship. But when they turned the last corner, Taro was already there, waiting. With ***, 10 heavily armed Darvan soldiers. Jack's stomach dropped ***. Taro sighed. "I really did like you, Jack, but this is too big to pass up." Arriva's face hardened. "You sold us out." Taro shrugged. "Princess, you're worth more credits than I'll ever see in my lifetime. Nothing personal." The Darvan commander stepped forward, tall, clad in dark armor. His icy black eyes locked onto Arriva. "You've run far enough, Your Highness," he said smoothly. "Come quietly, and your death will be painless." Jack tensed. Arriva slowly raised her hands. "If I go with you, will you let him go?" Jack's heart hammered. "Arriva, don't." The Darvan commander smirked. Of course, Jack knew he was lying. He also knew Arriva knew it too. Arriva glanced at Jack. Then, something in her eyes changed. Her fingers twitched, and suddenly, the entire hallway erupted in blue light. Her hidden power. Jack staggered back as a wave of energy blasted from Arriva's body, sending Darvan soldiers flying. The air crackled with power, and for the first time, Jack realized she wasn't just a princess. She was something much, much more. Taro, wide-eyed, stumbled back in fear. Jack didn't hesitate. He grabbed Arriva's wrist and ran. They sprinted toward the hangar, toward the rust bucket. Blasters fired behind them, but Jack didn't stop. They had to get out. Now, the forbidden world. Jack Carter had been in bad situations before. Being chased by bounty hunters, nearly getting fried by plasma cannons, crash landing on asteroid belts. All of that was just another Tuesday. But running through a lawless smuggler station, being hunted by elite Darvan soldiers, alongside a runaway alien princess with terrifying powers. Yeah, this was a new level of crazy. The alarms blared across Shadow's Rest, red lights flashing. The corridors shook with footsteps as more mercenaries and bounty hunters mobilized, all chasing one prize. Arriva, the last royal of Velari. Jack and Arriva raced through the smoke-filled docking bay, dodging laser fire as they sprinted toward the rust bucket. Arriva's violet eyes glowed faintly, her energy still crackling from the blast that had knocked the Darvans back earlier. She was breathing hard, shaken by the sudden release of her power. Jack gritted his teeth. "You gonna tell me what that was back there?" Arriva didn't answer. Her face was pale, her hands trembling slightly. Jack cursed. Whatever she had done, it had drained her. But there was no time to question it now. Ahead, 3 Darvan soldiers stepped in their path, weapons raised. Jack didn't slow. He pulled his blaster and fired 3 shots in rapid succession. One hit home, sending the first soldier sprawling. The second shot was dodged. The third only grazed armor. The remaining Darvans charged forward, one swinging a shock baton at Jack's head. Jack ducked, then spun, driving his elbow into the soldier's ribs before grabbing his gun and slamming it into the side of the Darvan's helmet. The soldier staggered back, dazed. Arriva, despite her exhaustion, whipped out a small blade from her belt and sliced the air with precision, cutting across the final soldier's armor before driving her knee into his stomach. Jack grabbed her wrist. "No time for fancy fighting, princess. Move." They rushed up the loading ramp of the rust bucket just as more Darvan troops stormed the hangar. Jack slapped the emergency lockdown button, sealing the airlock. Laser fire hammered the hull as he bolted to the cockpit, flipping switches and overriding security protocols. Engines roared. Plasma beams lit up the sky as the Darwins tried to blast them down. Jack punched the thrusters to max. With a deafening boom, the rust bucket shot out of Shadow's Rest, barreling through the smuggler station's artificial atmosphere and jumping straight into the chaos of open space. But the danger wasn't over yet. No safe place left. Ariva slumped into the co-pilot's seat, breathing heavily. Sweat dripped down her temple. Jack's hands flew over the controls, checking their status. "All right, Princess. Where to?" Ariva hesitated. "There is only one place left." Jack frowned. "Why do I not like the sound of that?" She looked at him, her eyes determined. "Haven's shadow." Jack's blood went cold. No. That's a death world." Ariva nodded. "That is why it is safe. The Darwins will not follow us there." Jack leaned back in his seat, incredulous. "You want me to take my ship into the most dangerous, uncharted, completely uninhabitable planet in this system, on purpose?" Ariva sat up. "I was told it was once a refuge. My people hid there long ago, before the war. If there are still Vailari warriors left, they may protect us." Jack sighed. This was suicide. But the radar beeped. Multiple Darwin ships were closing in. Jack cursed. There was no other choice. He grabbed the controls and steered the rust bucket toward the blackened mass of Haven's shadow, a planet shrouded in swirling storms, jagged mountains, and hostile creatures. It was the last place in the galaxy anyone sane would go, and it was their only hope. Crash landing. As soon as they entered Haven's shadow's atmosphere, the ship began shaking violently. Jagged lightning storms crackled across the sky, sending bursts of raw energy into the thick clouds. The wind howled, slamming against the hull, pushing the ship off course. Jack gripped the controls tightly, sweat dripping down his forehead. "Hold on. This is gonna be rough." The turbulence was brutal. Ariva braced herself, gripping the seat. Then, an impact. Something massive struck the ship's side. The cockpit lights flickered. "Damn it!" Jack shouted. The ship spun out of control, hurtling toward the planet's jagged terrain. Jack fought to regain control, diverting all power to stabilizers. The rust bucket lurched, slowing just enough to avoid total destruction. With a final bone-jarring crash, the ship skidded across the rocky ground, sparks and smoke trailing behind it. Then, silence. The forbidden land. Jack coughed, shaking his head. He was alive. That was the good news. The bad news. The ship was in pieces. Ariva groaned beside him. "We made it." Jack forced a laugh. "Define made it." Through the cracked cockpit window, Jack got his first real look at Haven's shadow. It was a wasteland of blackened mountains, twisting trees with glowing red veins, and thick, swirling fog. The air shimmered with strange energy, and in the distance, dark shapes moved through the mist. Jack's gut twisted. They weren't alone. Ariva exhaled. This was once sacred land. Jack checked his blaster. "Yeah. Well, I got a feeling the locals won't roll out the red carpet." They stepped out of the ship. The ground was warm beneath Jack's boots. The sky was a deep crimson, storm clouds swirling unnaturally fast. Then, a sound. A deep guttural growl echoed through the valley. Ariva froze. "Something is watching us." Jack whirled around, blaster raised. Something. A figure stepped from the fog. Tall, armor made of bone and metal, eyes glowing violet. More appeared behind him. Silent warriors, moving with an unnatural grace. Jack instantly knew what they were. "Princess," he whispered, "you said there might be warriors left." Ariva's voice was barely a whisper. "They are the Shadow Guard, the last defenders of my people." The lead warrior raised a blade toward them. "Why have you come to this cursed place?" His voice rumbled. Jack tensed. He wasn't sure if this was a rescue or an execution. The last stand. Jack Carter had always prided himself on one thing: staying alive in impossible situations. Right now, that skill was being pushed to its limit. Standing before him in the ruins of Haven's Shadow were the last of the Valari Shadow Guard. Silent, deadly warriors clad in bone-forged armor, their violet eyes glowing like specters in the stormy twilight. They held ancient weapons, some crackling with dark energy, others humming with advanced technology lost to time. And every single one of them was staring straight at Ariva. Jack's instincts screamed at him to pull his blaster, but he wasn't stupid enough to start a fight with a dozen elite warriors. The lead warrior stepped forward, his armor etched with the markings of a long-dead Valari dynasty. His face was hidden beneath a cracked helmet, but his voice carried weight and authority. "You should not have come here, Princess." Ariva lifted her chin, though Jack could see her fingers tremble slightly. "I had no choice," she said, her voice steadier than he expected. "The Darvins will not stop hunting me. If there is anything left of the Valari, we must stand together." The warrior was silent for a long moment. Then he removed his helmet, revealing a face scarred by war, his silver-blue skin weathered with age. His violet eyes studied Ariva closely, as if searching for something. Then, finally, he spoke. "The Valari fell long ago. This place is a graveyard. You bring war here, Princess." Jack could see the struggle in Ariva's face. "I know," she whispered, "but if I do not fight, then my people truly are gone." The warrior sighed, glancing at the wreckage of the rust bucket. "The Darvins will be here soon." Jack tensed. "How soon are we talking?" The warrior turned to the horizon. The crimson sky above the valley had darkened. Storm clouds churned unnaturally fast, but that wasn't what made Jack's stomach twist. Through the mist, a fleet of black ships was descending. Darvin warships. They had found them. Jack muttered a curse. Well, that didn't take long. Preparing for war, the Shadow Guard moved fast, silent, precise. Jack watched as they activated long-hidden defenses, old Valari technology that had been buried beneath the ruins. Ancient towers flickered to life, shields hummed, and hidden weapons rose from the ground. Ariva followed the warriors, speaking quickly in their native tongue. Jack wasn't much for royal politics, but he could tell what was happening. She was rallying them. He caught up to her as she tightened a set of reinforced armor plates onto her forearms. Jack crossed his arms. "So, what's the plan, Princess?" Ariva turned to him. "We make our last stand." Jack raised an eyebrow. "You sure about this? Because I don't like fights where I don't have an exit." She smiled slightly. "Then you are not going to like this at all." Jack sighed. "Of course not." The Shadow Guard gathered, their weapons glowing with energy. They moved like ghosts in the storm, taking their positions along the cliffs and ruins. Jack checked his blaster, feeling the weight of what was coming. "This is crazy," he muttered. Ariva looked at him. "We will not survive this without you." Jack met her gaze. Something about the way she said it made him forget his usual sarcasm. He sighed. "All right, let's give them hell." The first wave. The Darvin warships descended, their metal hulls glinting in the storm light. With a thunderous roar, dropships released waves of enemy soldiers, their dark armor blending into the shadows as they spread across the valley. Jack took cover behind a collapsed pillar, gripping his blaster tight. Then, the first shots rang out. The Shadow Guard struck first, their weapons unleashing deadly energy blasts that cut through the first wave of Darvin foot soldiers. Jack fired into the chaos, dropping 2 Darvins as they tried to flank. The battle was a storm of explosions, energy shields, and brutal close-quarters combat. Above them, Valari sky turrets, long buried beneath the ruins, powered up and began raining fire down on the Darvin ships. For a moment, it almost looked like they had the upper hand. Then the Darvin warlords arrived. The Darvin warlords. Jack had heard stories about them. Elite soldiers, enhanced with cybernetic implants, trained for one thing: obliteration. 3 of them dropped into the battlefield, Towering figures clad in black armor, their weapons humming with plasma energy. One of them ripped through the Shadow Guard's defenses like paper, swinging a blade that crackled with dark energy. Another sent a pulse wave that shattered stone, knocking Valeri warriors back like dolls. Jack's heart pounded. They weren't fighting soldiers anymore. They were fighting monsters. Eriva stepped forward, her violet eyes burning. Jack grabbed her arm. "What the hell are you doing?" She didn't look at him. "This is my fight." Then, before he could stop her, she raised both hands and unleashed a wave of raw energy. Eriva's true power. The air cracked. A massive shockwave exploded outward, sending Darvan soldiers flying. The warlord staggered, struggling against the energy pulse. Jack shielded his eyes from the blinding light. When it cleared, Eriva stood in the center of the battlefield, her energy spiraling around her like a living storm. For the first time, even the Darvan warlords hesitated. Jack had always known she was special. But this was something else entirely. One of the warlords sneered. "So, the lost princess finally awakens." Eriva's voice was like steel. "You will not take my people." The warlord raised his blade. "Then you will die with them." Jack gritted his teeth. No way in hell was he letting that happen. The final battle begins. The warlords charged. The Shadow Guard stood their ground. Eriva stepped forward, her hands glowing with raw power. And Jack Carter. He did what he did best. He pulled his blaster, cracked his neck, and ran straight into the fight. Because if this was the last stand, he was damn well going to make it count. A new destiny. Jack Carter had never planned on being a hero. He was just a guy trying to stay alive, making credits where he could, avoiding wars and royal dramas. But right now, he was standing in the middle of a battlefield, blaster smoking, staring down a Darvan warlord who was about to carve him in half. The storm-racked sky of Haven's shadow boiled with lightning as the battle raged on. The ruins of an ancient civilization shook with the force of explosions, plasma blasts, and the raw energy radiating from Eriva's awakening power. Jack could barely process what he had just seen. Eriva wasn't just some lost princess. She was something else. Something dangerous, powerful, untamed. And right now, that power was the only thing standing between them and annihilation. The Darvan warlord before Jack, a massive brute in black armor, ***, his face hidden behind a visor streaked with pulsing red veins. ***, raised his blade. "Your luck runs out here, human," the warlord sneered. His voice was a metallic growl, distorted by cybernetic enhancements. Jack's blaster clicked empty. Well, that wasn't good. The warlord lunged. Jack dove to the side, rolling behind a half-collapsed column, as the warlord's plasma blade slashed through stone like butter. He needed a weapon. Fast. Jack's fingers found a discarded Valeri shock rifle on the ground. He grabbed it, spun, and fired. But the warlord deflected the shot with his blade like it was nothing. Jack swore. "Of course, you're one of those guys." The warlord stalked forward, his footsteps sending tremors through the broken earth. Jack prepared to move, but then the air changed. A low hum, like the crackling of a solar storm, filled the battlefield. And suddenly, Eriva was there. Eriva's awakening. She moved with unnatural speed, appearing between Jack and the warlord in the blink of an eye. Her violet eyes burned like twin stars, her body radiating a shimmering aura of pure energy. The warlord hesitated, just for a second. Eriva raised a hand. A pulse of light erupted outward. The warlord flew back, smashing into the side of a crumbling Valeri temple with a deafening crash. Jack pushed himself up, stunned. Okay, that was new. Eriva turned to him. Her face was different now. Stronger, older, like she had stepped fully into who she was meant to be. Her voice was calm, but absolute. "This ends now." Jack wiped dust from his face. "Fine by me. Got a plan." Arriva didn't answer. She simply turned and walked toward the heart of the battlefield. The battle turns. The Darvins had rallied, pushing the Shadow Guard back toward the cliffs. Their warlords were brutal, cutting through warriors like shadows made of steel. But the moment Arriva stepped forward, everything changed. She lifted both hands, and the storm itself obeyed her. Lightning crashed from the sky, striking the ground between the Velari warriors and the Darvin forces. A wall of crackling energy rose, dividing the battlefield. The Darvin soldiers hesitated. Fear crept into their ranks. One of their commanders stepped forward, raising a fist. "Hold your ground. Kill the girl." Arriva simply closed her eyes. The ground beneath her lit up with ancient symbols, Velari runes that had been buried for centuries. Jack watched in awed disbelief as the ruins of Haven's Shadow came to life. Structures that had been dead for 1,000 years hummed with energy. The statues of old Velari warriors shook and cracked, then moved, their stone bodies infused with Arriva's power. Jack muttered under his breath, "Well, that's terrifying." The Darvins saw it too. For the first time, they looked uncertain. Then, the attack began. The last stand. The Shadow Guard and the newly awakened Velari Sentinels charge, meeting the Darvin forces in a final clash of steel, plasma, and raw energy. Jack found himself right in the middle of it, dodging blaster fire, taking cover, and shooting back when he could. He wasn't some warrior or chosen hero. He was just a survivor. But if this was going to be his last fight, he was going to make it count. A Darvin soldier lunged at him. Jack shot first. Another tried to flank him. Jack ducked, grabbed a fallen vibroblade, and took them down. The battle was chaos. But slowly, the tide was turning. Arriva was at the heart of it all. Her power was no longer unstable. It was controlled, precise. The Darvin warlords tried to fight her. They failed. One by one, she cut them down, not with weapons, but with raw energy, bending the very elements of the battlefield to her will. Then, finally, only one enemy remained. The final choice. The last Darvin warlord. Asterisk, the same one who had nearly killed Jack earlier. Asterisk, staggered back, his armor smoking, his weapon shattered. He fell to one knee before Arriva. Defeated. Arriva stood over him, hands glowing, her breathing heavy. Jack saw the look in her eyes. The Velari had been hunted, slaughtered. The Darvins had wiped out her people. This was her chance to end them. The warlord spat blood, then laughed. "You think this is over, girl?" He growled. "More will come. You can kill me, but you cannot kill the Empire." Arriva didn't move. Jack stepped beside her. "You don't have to do this." She turned to him, violet eyes filled with rage and sorrow. "He would not show mercy to me." Jack nodded. "That's why we have to be better." Arriva stared at him for a long moment. Then, finally, she lowered her hands. The warlord's face twisted in confusion. "You should have killed me." Arriva's voice was steady. "You are not worth my anger." She turned away. Jack smirked. "Tough break, buddy." The Shadow Guard dragged the warlord away, and the battlefield fell silent. A new beginning. As the dust settled, Jack looked out over what remained of Haven's Shadow. The Darvins had been defeated. The Velari still stood. And Arriva, she wasn't just a lost princess anymore. She was something more. Jack crossed his arms. "So, what now?" Arriva looked at him. "Now, we rebuild." Jack sighed. "Guess that means I'm out of a job." Arriva smiled. "You could stay. The Velari could use someone like you." Jack chuckled. "Tempting. But I'm not exactly royal material." She stepped closer. "Then maybe I will find you again." Jack looked at her, then grinned. "Yeah, I got a feeling you will." As the rust bucket lifted off into the stormy sky, Jack knew one thing. He had just made the most powerful friend in the galaxy. And somehow, he knew this wasn't the last time they'd meet. The end, or just the beginning.